Chapter 2. A Brief History of Power. Section 1. Evolution of the Government Racket. Once humans could generate more than needed to sustain themselves, it became worthwhile to exploit them. To understand the origins of government and interpersonal violence, we need to go all the way back to the state of nature, or perhaps even earlier to our biological origin. We have always sought to meet our needs by controlling the world around us, including other people. Most human relations have been cooperative and nonviolent, but the desire to control others by force evolved from the first temptation to steal to the modern governments we know today. If government is defined as rule by force, we might have never experienced a state of nature without government. In some primitive hunter-gatherer groups, people had to accept that whoever was strongest was in charge. Perhaps it was in the best interest of the individual to go along with such a system because to challenge it could mean you would be on your own, or worse, injured or killed. Because we are pack animals, we developed complex languages that allowed us to communicate and coordinate. Suddenly, the guy who could pick up the biggest rock wasn't necessarily in charge. It was the best hunter, the guy who could effectively lead a coordinated effort that required communication and cooperation. Then, great hunters started calling themselves chiefs, and the first ongoing protection rackets that might resemble modern governments started to emerge. Technology has played a primary role in determining social order because it determines what productive capacity can be exploited. Before language or tools, people could only gather relatively little in excess of their needs. With the invention of the tools needed for hunting, there was often excess food that freed up creative energies for other production, but also for other manipulation. With the development of agriculture, people could create far more food than they could consume and could support a whole variety of specialized labor, including the unique profession of the government leech. With the rise of industry, the productive output of the individual increased dramatically, and so did society's overall ability to support people who were completely unproductive or even counterproductive. If governments took half the income of primitive peasants who could barely get enough food to feed themselves, they would all die or revolt against such massive theft. However, if governments take half the income of modern industrial workers whose salaries can feed 10 families, then use some of it to convince them it's for their own good, they might even vote for higher taxes. Or at worst, they'll vote for the other politician who will just steal a little bit less from them on behalf of the same sponsors. As we have become more productive per person, we have become better educated and more aware of governments. As a result, governments have used education and mass media to make us think that the racket is essential or even beneficial, but the effects are in decline. We have come to demand more control over our own decisions and to go about our lives without being robbed or assaulted. The history of government has been defined by two arcs: the development of our capacity to tolerate theft and our awareness that we deserve to live without being robbed. The first arc will continue to grow exponentially with technology, but the second arc will eventually outpace the first. This can be seen in the development of modern participatory democracies. Of all the various forms of government, this is the last one before achieving a truly free society. The long view of history provides an inspiring story of the development of self-government. If we only look at the current period, we might see it as a struggle for democracy. Fighting for equal participation in the forced control of others prevents us from achieving the greater goal of a society that respects self-ownership. Democracy is a way to pretend that we are all equal slave owners. The reality is always going to be far less than the champions of democracy promise because it is based on a fundamentally immoral ideal. No one has the right to force a leader on anyone else, and no mandate from the majority gives any leader the right to use force against anyone. Democracy is the justification for most of what the super rich were going to do to everyone else anyway. If anything, it provides a very convenient cover for them to do whatever they want because democracy allows them to say they are doing it according to the will of the people. This has given rise to the modern bureaucracies that make it seem like every aspect of our lives is affected by government, or more precisely, controlled by threats of violence. Yet the illusion of participation through voting keeps us coming back for more. Because we are pragmatic creatures who cannot disagree with the existing social order if we cannot eat, we have more or less gone along with the progression of the racket. While productivity has increased and governments have grown, the demand for self-government is accelerating, and the illusion of democracy won't satisfy it. Major historical revolutions have made the racket more difficult, even unworkable at times. But only after the global paradigm shift to freedom will we shed the racket once and for all. As society evolved, we retained our primal instincts. We are a communal species, not dependent on each other, but dependent on cooperation to maintain our standard of living and to enhance our chances of survival and reproduction. Because cooperation is superior to coercion, we have continuously developed better ways of organizing society to foster cooperation. The era of modern governments represents an important step in the process, but it is by no means the final one. The adoption of a new paradigm based on freedom will soon render all forms of organized exploitation laughably obsolete.